some Bibles actually have in the margin of the Bible dates, dating the age of the earth, or as you're reading through the Bible, giving you a date of when these events took place in the margin. For example, if you have the Old Scofield Bible in the center column, at the top of the center column, has these dates and shows that the creation took place in 4004 BC, about 6,000 years ago. The Scofield Bible uses calculations that were made by Archbishop James Ussher back in the 1600s. And he just used the information, the data that was in the Scriptures to come up with these calculations, using the genealogies in chapters 5 and 11 and a few other passages, and you're able to calculate the age of the earth. And as I mentioned, this was the consensus view among Bible interpreters going all the way back to before the time of Christ. And this was the consensus view all the way up until the late 19th century, early 20th century, when people began to believe the earth was millions of years old, or even billions of years old. So this was the consensus view among the church, or among believers, for thousands of years, until pretty recent history. Some have tried to put gaps into this genealogy to accommodate millions of years of history. But the language here in this chapter and in chapter 11, the language in the genealogies doesn't really allow for gaps in the record. If you remember back when we were studying Genesis chapter 1, and we were looking at the creation account in Genesis 1, and we talked about the meaning of the word day, and I mentioned that some people have interpreted the word day to mean an age, a period of time that could be millions of years, and that the word day in the creation account is not to be taken literally. And I mentioned at that time that linguistically the word day has to mean day. It can't be speaking of an age. Well, the same thing is true here with these genealogies. They have to be, there's no gaps in these genealogies. There's no way that there can be gaps in these genealogies linguistically because of what it says. And there's more we could say about that. We don't really have the time right now. You can dig into that on your own. So now let's just kind of get into the text, and let's make some observations about the chapter. Look at verse 1. Verse 1 begins by saying, "This is the book of the genealogy of Adam." The book of the genealogy of Adam. The only other time that phrase is used is in Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, where we have the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ. And so there's a connection made between these two genealogies that we have here in Genesis 5 and in Matthew 1. There's a connection made between Adam and Jesus Christ, which makes sense because Jesus is called the last Adam. And the Bible tells us that you are born into the first Adam's family, and then you're born again into the family of the last Adam, Jesus Christ. So there's two families here, so there's two genealogies. There's the first Adam and the last Adam, or Jesus Christ. Look at verse 3. It says, "And Adam lived 130 years, and begot a son," notice, "in his own likeness, after his image, and named him Seth." If you remember from chapter 1, Adam was created in the image of God, but here we see Seth was created in the image of Adam. Adam's descendants are made in the image of both God and in the image of Adam. In other words, Adam's descendants, including us, inherited Adam's fallen nature. We are all sinners like Adam. We're all made in Adam's image. We're a chip off the old block, just like Grandpa Adam. And we have his sin nature. We're sinners just like Adam. In Romans chapter 5, verse 12, it says, when Adam sinned, sin entered the world, and death through Adam's sin, and death spread to everyone because everyone sins. What that means is we all inherited the sin gene from Adam. And the Bible tells us that the wages of sin is death, and so we all die. Hebrews tells us that we each have an appointment with death, every one of us. Hebrews says it is appointed unto man once to die, and then comes the judgment. We have an appointment with death and an appointment with the judgment of God. The good news is Jesus Christ came and He died for us in our place as our substitute to conquer death for us, to defeat the grave, and to give us everlasting life. That's the good news. 1 Corinthians 15:22 says, just as everyone dies because we all belong to Adam, everyone who belongs to Christ will be given new life. In Adam we die, in Christ we are made alive. That's the good news of the gospel. Jesus put it this way in the Gospel of John. I'll just read it to you. But in John chapter 11, Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? Jesus asked the question. Though we may die, we shall live. We have everlasting life, resurrected life through Jesus Christ. As you look through this chapter and this genealogy, we see a sad refrain repeated with each person. And that sad refrain is, and he died. Look at what it says about Adam in verse 5. It says, so all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. We see with Seth in verse 8, and he died, and he died, and he died. That's the story of every generation. Every generation was born in the likeness of Adam and lived and died in the likeness of Adam. After the fall, death reigned over mankind, and death continues to reign over mankind. And he died is still the sad refrain for every person, for all of mankind. But the resurrection of Jesus Christ gives us hope, living hope beyond death. The sad refrain ends with the empty tomb. When Jesus Christ rose from the grave, death was defeated for us. Death no longer has the final word in our story. Death has been swallowed by the victory that Jesus Christ provided for us through His death and resurrection. Now, skip down with me to verse 21. Again, I'm just highlighting some observations here for us from this genealogy. Verse 21 says, and Enoch lived 65 years, and he begot Methuselah. After he begot Methuselah, look what it says. Enoch walked with God 300 years and had sons and daughters. And so all the days of Enoch were 365 years, and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Enoch walked with God, and God took him to heaven. Enoch is the only person in this genealogy who didn't experience death. He's the only one that doesn't have that sad refrain, and he died, which gives us, a glimmer of hope here as death is reigning over mankind in this chapter. And he died, and he died. But wait, here's someone who walked with God, and God took him to heaven. He escaped death. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 5 says of Enoch, by faith Enoch was taken away so that he did not see death and was not found because God had taken him. For before he was taken, he had this testimony that he pleased God. Enoch walked with God. He pleased God by faith. And then God translated him to heaven, or God transferred him to heaven.